All right, welcome back everybody. I hope you're still with us and having fun. With me now in this meeting is Leee Jeffries, and I'm very, very happy that Leee is here because he's extremely busy. He's one of the top Citrix guys in the UK, so he's the guy to call if you're having Citrix problems. I don't know if he has more time because he's been working around the clock to help sort issues. So Leee, I'm very thankful that you found time in your schedule to present here today at the VDI Performance Summit. Your session actually got some of the best scores in Amsterdam, so please, Leee, if you could tell the same story you did there, but now online for the whole world, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Mark. Much appreciated. Hi, everybody. Okay, so this session I'm about to run is talking all about performance and taking a XenApp environment and making it perform nicely. So, as Mark mentioned, my name's Leee Jeffries. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK and working in Europe. I'm a father of 3, married, and have a passion for keeping fit. I've been working in IT for 15 years, with my main focus being in the EUC arena for the last 8 years. I focus mainly on Citrix products, but also work with other vendors too. I'm proud to be a current Citrix technology professional. So, we're going to talk about how fast the speed of light is in this presentation today. So it's a little bit of a different type of speed of light in this particular respect, but we're going to dig into that. A big focus on user experience and really understanding exactly how that may impact productivity and employee satisfaction. We're going to look at analysing our current employees' areas of pain and communicating that back to IT and a management team in an effective way. I'll cover the technical details of a specific example and performance before and after changes have been made to that environment. So we'll also be looking at the cost of a solution, the particular solution that addressed the problems, and so you can understand exactly what that looked like as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I work in the EUC space and cover a broad scope of technologies, but mainly focus on virtual desktops and connectivity, i.e. like networking products. I'm usually performing some sort of technical governance over a project. I'm reviewing designs, contributing to sort of thought processes and things like that, more in an architect fashion, but I still like to get my hands dirty as well. So the client I'm using as an example in this presentation had a 1,000 user virtual desktop environment. I was asked to perform an upgrade from XenApp Desktop 7.11 to the latest at the time, which was Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops 18.08. This environment was fully cloud native and all components were running in Azure. The user experience, however, was pretty poor. I was given a tour on my first day and introduced as the Citrix guy. The response was, good luck. That's from the staff that actually were working there. So they knew I was I had my back against the wall at that point. So this originally started off as a small 2 to 3 week piece of work that grew into a contract that lasted a little more than a full year. It was my absolute pleasure to work with the organisation. I, of course, won't be stating names within the presentation just to protect the client's privacy. But the way that I got involved with this was purely from a health check standpoint to come in and review what was going on in the environment and then to potentially propose a way forward. So before I dig in, I'd like to start with a few words of advice that have helped me in my career so far. And these things, I'll elaborate on them because they seem a bit blunt, but don't trust what you are told. Always double check. So this phrase is more to do with primarily with troubleshooting. Always check with your own eyes, no matter what someone tells you. I find whenever you're digging into technical problems, especially in a high pressure environment, people tend to say, yes, I've done that. And people's understanding is always different. So I always prefer to sort of look with my own eyes. It doesn't mean I don't trust the person, but I really need them to understand that I've got to see it for myself to form that picture in my head. Double check the solution, read the documentation, understand the problem. I find that a lot of technical people have a tendency to jump to a conclusion based on their experience. So how an environment is configured, for example, or what a problem might be based on experience and symptoms. So where I talk to technical people that manage a solution, they're commonly surprised when asked how something may be configured, even though there is documentation available. So my advice to anyone is to always read the documentation on a solution before attempting to troubleshoot, unless there is none. In that case, create some before you get started so that you are fully informed on what's going on and how things are configured. Be kind to others, and in turn they will be kind to you. Stay humble. One of the biggest challenges as a consultant coming into a business cleanly and not knowing the people that you're working with is having to gather information from people and actually putting them out, making them provide a bit more effort in their normal day-to-day just to be able to help you and help your understanding. I was once told you have 2 eyes, 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in proportion. I'm not sure my wife would agree that I do that, but you know, it's something I try to do, is listen more than I talk, except when I'm doing webinars. Be honest, in the long run, it's appreciated. Okay, so even if someone doesn't necessarily want to hear what you're saying, especially in a corporate environment, be honest and tell them how it is. So with all this in mind, let's dig into the details. So the speed of light. Okay, so the speed of light is 1,080 million kilometers per hour. So that's pretty fast, right? We're not really talking the speed of light though. You really won't be able to see this kind of speed. So the main point here is about user experience and user perception. If you take something that's slow and sluggish and you make it much quicker, users will be very pleased with the increase. This has been likened previously to the speed of light. So from a user where I worked on this environment, he said, oh, it's so fast, it's like the speed of light. Obviously, it's not that fast, but that being said, there's not necessarily a need to tweak everything in an environment. If the solution gives an improvement that's much better than what the users were already experiencing, it can be likened to the speed of light. So that's what we're talking about. So user experience, right? This is, everybody talks about user experience, but I really want to sort of bottom this out. So user experience is not how quickly your screen reacts, although it's a factor. User experience is not your login time, although that's a factor too, right? But if you had a mouse and your buttons were reversed, then that's a bad user experience. There's nothing you can necessarily do about that in a virtual environment. But as an example, who wants to wash something under that tap? You're not going to rinse anything under there because you're going to get electrocuted. It's going to lead to a bad user experience. This guy using the ATM, he's got to sit on the floor because the ATM is mounted so far down in the wall. That's a bad user experience. I mean, especially if it's raining, right? So what about this one? So this is a really key one for me. Every time you go and press one of those keys, every time you look at it, your brain is going to stop and it's going to try and work out which key it should be pressing. Now you know which key you've got to press, right? But your brain's still going to work that out. This distraction that you're going to have just every time you look at those is going to cause you a bit of a problem. So when we're talking about user experience, any of these things will eventually lead to this. So on the left, we've got a nice path. Everybody should be walking through the park like this. However, because actually people want to go to those shops over there on the right, or they want to go, you know, find their car, whatever, they're cutting straight through the grass. They've made their own path. This is exactly what I see in IT all the time. And this is exactly what you need to try and avoid. Happy users means a quiet help desk, which means easier maintenance and less resistance when you want to put in changes. You become sort of a trusted IT person. So we're in charge of these large environments that affect a lot of users. So we've got to take responsibility for that user experience. I can guarantee you that if you do this, you will have happy and more productive users. there's no way in the world that if you give someone a tool that does exactly what they've asked for, and they can do their daily jobs without any resistance, that you're going to get any kickback from them. But things need to be as easy as possible and relate to exactly what that user needs to do. So it's our responsibility to achieve that. Now, when I was researching for this presentation, I came across a study, and this is something that a lot of workspace technologies are actually referencing right now, and it's that if you're distracted by something on the screen, say a pop-up that asks you to install updates or anything really, activate software, if you're in the middle of doing something, then it takes you 23 minutes and 15 seconds exactly to return to your original task after that interruption. And that's for you to completely get your mind back in the frame that it was before you were interrupted. So the research has shown that actually this sort of interruption leads to higher stress levels because you get distracted and your brain's having to refocus, and a bad mood, and that equals lower productivity. So we want nice, smooth running, right? So this particular client that I'm using as an example, what we did and how we did it, this is their configuration. So they're all native to Azure, as I mentioned previously, 1,000 users on XenApp at the time, using Server 2016 remote desktop services. They've got persistent machines in Azure, they've got FSLogix with profile corruption, lots of different office locations spread out across the country in the UK, and thin client primarily. Different user experiences based on different devices. And then they've got an F5 physical appliance sitting on-prem, proxying the ICA traffic up to Azure. So number one that I don't like is the persistent machines. Why would we do that in Azure? It's much more difficult to manage. And they were actually looking at putting SCCM in Azure to manage this. So yeah, we'll kick that one to the curb immediately. I've put like a sick face next to a thin client primarily, but it's more down towards the different user experiences based on devices. So I have nothing against thin clients, they're great tech, but I'll dig into that into more detail in a bit. So the F5 remote access solution, like I say, that's sitting on-prem. The users come in through an external IP there, and then they go through a VPN tunnel up to Azure to get to their session servers, which was a little bit of an awkward way of doing it. So that's the scenario, and let's just talk about where we got to after making the changes. So before we do all the details, let's look at the results. Login times of 20 to 25 seconds. Windows 10 look and feel desktop regardless of the endpoint that they connect on. Reliable and prompt internet proxy service, so secure internet browsing, and we achieved a 70% reduction in support tickets, which was absolutely huge. The support team were definitely happy once this had gone into play. So I took some time and I talked to the users. I felt it was really important to understand the issues that they were facing. So this is a summary of the issues that they were combating on a daily basis. So users said thin clients were rubbish. So their understanding of a thin client is it's Citrix. They needed to try multiple times to log in. Logins sometimes fail and they didn't see their icons. Sometimes their settings are missing, and they were referring more to sort of office applications or Internet Explorer favorites and stuff like that. Office is slow to launch and sometimes crashes. Support take an age to remotely access user devices to troubleshoot issues. And there is no point in calling support, it's just too busy. So the screenshot I put here is actually a screenshot from Google, but this is what they were using. They had a Linux-based iGel, and they were running published apps and only published apps. Some users had a Windows-based iGel, some users had a laptop or a desktop. So it was really varied and quite difficult for the support teams to understand how they'd connect. So why did we get this feedback? So putting it into technical terms. So the IGL desktop and published apps only. So it didn't matter if you're using IGL, Linux IGL or Windows IGL, you just had published apps. So you'd always get your stock IGL desktop. So straight away, the users are going to want a richer experience because they're like the second class citizen. There wasn't enough servers available, and load evaluation was set incorrectly. So the Citrix sizing just wasn't right. The image wasn't really optimized either. So the support team would actually reset the broker service on the Citrix controllers in the morning if they logged too many tickets about not being able to connect. This was their fix that they thought would solve the problem. You know, when I told them it actually made it worse, they didn't believe me. Settings were missing because VHD files were not connecting. They were timing out occasionally. And support just used to delete the VHD files to get people up and running again. So they never looked at why profiles were corrupting. No one ever found a root cause. They just deleted them. The cloud proxy service, the internet proxy service, the web browsing was just slow, but it was a problem with that service. And the last bit, which is most important, is the support team were overloaded. So when they're in a rush and they're under pressure, what they're doing there is just sticky plastering things or working around the problem where they can rather than actually trying to find solutions. They just don't have the time. So talking about the support team, so just to condense the pain points, their pain points. So we've looked at it from a user point of view, we've looked at it from a technical point of view to understand why we've got the problems. And then looking at it from a support point of view, we've got varying software and endpoints to troubleshoot. We've got Windows IGLs, Linux IGLs, laptops, desktops, and BYOD. They had some Windows 7 laptops and desktops and Windows 10. So all in all, they had something like, I think, 4 different solutions for shadowing different types of users based on the endpoint. So they're always reliant on the user giving them information about the endpoint in order for them to try and solve any problems. In this particular scenario, director shadowing published apps on a Linux IGL was completely useless. So lack of understanding and training of the technical teams to identify problems. So because the technical teams weren't able to find the issues, they weren't able to rectify them. So the support team were just completely swamped. Too much of it was being handed off to them rather than actually being diagnosed and fixed. So part of the discovery process, I phoned the out of hours support as part of this to find out, you know, what the process was really. I didn't want to get given some paperwork. I wanted to really understand what out of hours was. I told the guy there was a problem with a Citrix server and I couldn't get connected, and he asked me if it was on fire. Because it wasn't on fire, he wasn't really interested in doing anything about it out of hours. So all in all, everybody's pretty demotivated by all this stuff. So breaking down the pain and bottoming it out to some specific key points. We've got speed and consistency of login is a big issue and is massively impacting user experience. So speed and consistency is an issue of login. Personalization breakdown. So users are missing settings even when they do get connected. And we've got slow internet access.
So Leee, this is Mark. There's a question coming in that I couldn't answer from Eugene. Did they have any Chromebooks?
A couple of users had Chromebooks actually, yeah. But that was more of a BYOD thing. There wasn't a business initiative to buy Chromebooks. All right,
well, carry on. Thank you.
No worries. So products in play. So we had Azure, we've got IGL, we've got Citrix, we've got FSLogix, and their proxy service was WebRoot. So it's all the right stuff, right? You know, we're working with this stuff today. We're deploying these solutions in order to solve problems today. So it's all the right stuff. So really, where's the problem? So the issues. In Azure, we've got the wrong virtual machine configuration. And all of this information came from a health check of the environment that I'd previously done. That was what I was originally brought in to do. So we've got the wrong machine specification and too many users loaded onto those machines. iGel's good kit, but the end user devices were very different and they were all configured differently as well. So that the Windows iGel units were domain joined and being managed by group policy and UMS. Sometimes we had conflicting settings there. We had the Linux iGels were domain integrated. So you logged in with your domain credentials before you got to see your applications. So there's a bit of a difference the way that's configured. You can just log into receiver on the Linux iGel, or you can log into the iGel with domain credentials and then launch receiver with single sign-on. So it was receiver with single sign-on in this particular scenario. But the problem was, right, we have these Windows iGels that are read-only, and every time they load up, they're also processing group policies. So they were really slow too. Desktops and laptops, Windows 7, Windows 10, as I mentioned previously. So any thin client users felt like second-class citizens because they didn't get the same experience as a laptop or desktop user. Citrix, really the issue there was just sizing. The load evaluators that were applied incorrectly had been put on there to try and combat the issues they were having with logins in the morning. That didn't help, it just made it worse. So FSLogix storage issues, not enough IOPS. Okay, so the storage was just struggling to keep up with the amount of operations that it needed to perform in order to merge VHDs, load VHDs. We'll dig into that too. And there was a few configuration issues there. And the proxy service was purely, it was the lowest priority out of the lot because it did work, it was just slow, but it just wasn't performing as expected. Should have been quicker. So we agreed after reviewing all these facts and me providing feedback I gathered to management that we would immediately address the issue in the current environment. So the current environment, just to recap, was XenApp Desktop 7.11, 2016 desktop with a single 2012 server siloed with a specific application. And we decided to fix FSLogix off the bat because that would remedy 90% of the issues, and we'd add a few Citrix servers as well to try and cope with the additional load during the login phase. So, and this slide was more questions when obviously I did this in person, but I've sort of taken that out because I don't think we can cope with that amount of responses. But I spent some time working with FSLogix and load testing storage a few years back based on their solution. And I was always surprised that when I spoke to people, they'd never come across any metrics that were published for storage requirements at that time. And a lot of people were deploying this and having issues, but it was very rarely the product itself. It was always the storage behind it. So let's take a look at the example of this particular customer and what happened to them and their storage. So what they had here, as I mentioned, it's all Azure native. So their current build, and this is problem number 1 with FSLogix, they had a VM with 4 standard storage disks on Azure, and they were RAIDed together with storage spaces. And as you can see here in this particular diagram, you can see the bit at the top and the nice pink line a bit lower. The nice pink line is the disk queue length, is the average disk queue length. The big blue line is the current disk queue length. So this particular VM was absolutely being smashed to pieces by users just trying to work normally, right? So it just wasn't keeping up with the IOPS that were needed. And the wait time for IO was huge. So you can imagine why we got profile corruption and Office was slow, or certain things were slow on the VM. The next slide shows you the VM that was hosting the Office 365 containers. Similar story, right? We've still got high disk queues. So the bottom line is the average disk queue, and then the blue line is the current disk queue. So we've still got really bad performance on these machines. And this was the main, or like the biggest issue, I would say, because even if the VM's not particularly performant or can't take the numbers, this should still work. And your profile should still load. So what we did is we analyzed this. Okay, so we put a few users onto different machines, and we isolated some storage that could be used, and we ran some performance monitoring, performance capture on that. So we just used perfmon for the performance capture. So these are the metrics that I'd advise you capture if you're looking at storage for FSLogix. Obviously, disk queue length is a factor, but don't forget read and write latency too. That will just, obviously the longer it takes to read or write, the bigger your disk queue will be. So I didn't put the latency in here, mainly because we had the VMs right next to each other. So put these performance counters in and capture the averages for those also. Okay, and then once you've captured that information, and you've done that on a standalone VM, say with 1 or 5 users or something, whatever you feel is a good number. Depends how much you're scaling and how much variation you want. If you could do it with all your users, happy days. That's the best you could ask for. So your average disk transfers a second. So if your average queue time is high and your average queue length is high, then you've got a problem. So to work out your average queue time, just times your disk queue length by your average disk transfers a second, and that will give you how long each operation waits before it's committed. Bear in mind, if you're using storage spaces or RAID, if you've got 8 disks, the average queue length should not exceed 16, because you should be dividing your queue length by the number of disks, okay, and that will give you your disk queue per disk roughly. So for IOPS sizing, take your average disk reads per second divided by the number of users you perform the test with, and then add 2 times standard deviation of disk reads a second divided by number of users. And what that should do is give you an IOPS calculation per user for your reads and your writes. And then you can scale your storage solution as it needs to be. So what we did, our interim build for FSLogix, and I say interim build because this was not the final solution. It was still a single VM for profiles and a single VM for Office 365 containers. So same graph as we did for the original ones. So we've got just premium storage, same VM spec, same disks, but in this particular scenario, just using premium storage instead. And you can see there the disk queues are much lower. Everything's performing much nicer. That graph actually wasn't the best. The profile storage still got a lot of traffic. If you look towards the left of the graph, still struggling a bit first thing in the morning. I could have resolved that by adding a couple more disks, but actually we didn't have an issue and it was coping with the load, so we left it as it was. And then this is the Office 365 container storage. So similar sort of scenario. Happy days. We've almost eliminated our profile corruption problem. Well, we have eliminated our profile corruption problem. So problem number 2 I mentioned was configuration related, and this was more to do with the way that the profile access was set up. So without setting anything up in FSLogix, you attach your VHD, and that VHD is yours. If you then launch another session somewhere else that tries to use that VHD, the VHD is locked and it won't be available. However, there is an option in here to to actually allow FSLogix to create an additional read-write VHD for you to cope with another concurrent session. And that's actually what was being used here. So that siloed machine that we had, that was a 2012 machine, users were actually running Outlook in that at the same time as they were running it in their desktop, which was what was causing us issues with Office, and that one took a little bit longer to nail down. But essentially, just make sure this is correct. If you don't need concurrency, don't switch it on. Problem number 3. Okay, so we had load evaluators set, so we kept getting user connection failures first thing in the morning, especially during logon periods where we were reporting unavailable capacity. And essentially, these load evaluators have been put in with these stats in order to be able to try and cap and make sure a certain number of users were guaranteed to log in. The problem was really compacted by the fact that the storage wasn't performing for profile loads or attaching VHD, so that logon period was just extended, and that just snowballs. Anyone that does performance testing will know you want your login as short as possible so that you're not snowballing that into the next one and impacting performance. And that's what was happening here. So we just turned off the load evaluators and we added enough machines to cope with the load. That was a nice simple one. So stabilisation complete, fires out. The team were no longer dealing with lots of profile issues. That seemed to be quite stable. The help desk calls reduced, and that just gave everyone a bit of breathing space and eased the stress a little bit. Okay, so no more. Then their normal day was from 8:30 until 10:30. They'd get continuous calls from various users about problems with profiles, and then they'd be trying to work out what sticky plus they need to put it on it today. That stopped. So we just didn't get that in the mornings anymore, which was a big help. So moving on, what we wanted from a new build though was to address all the user feedback. We had something more stable now, but not quite right. So we were still using the old stuff that wasn't optimized, and we're running this in Azure, right? So it's expensive. The process for this was user consultations, which I'd already performed, and bringing that back to the IT team and management so that we had a good set of requirements. And I mean, the biggest pain points for users, right, was basically they don't know how to log on dependent on these different devices. So people just didn't travel between offices because they were too worried they wouldn't be able to work. Consistent logon speed, and for IT, ease of maintenance and support. Just let's smooth this out so that we don't have so many varying issues. So this is what we did. We decided we'd build everything in Azure and we'd build side by side. So no on-prem resources for Citrix at all. I wanted to get rid of that F5 appliance. I really didn't like that. Not because there's anything wrong with F5, just because it was coming in on-prem and then going up to the cloud. So we built alongside the existing environment, and the main consideration for me was network resilience. If we were going to be doing this, everybody's on-prem and they're all accessing a main branch for an MPLS network and then routing up to Azure. And the business dealt with that themselves. They got a network guy in and he set up BGP routing between two gateways on two different sites and OSPF inter-site across the MPLS, which was fantastic. So we had two resilient links up to Azure with two different internet connections at each site. So that was ticked off for me. So we added into the mix Workspace Environment Manager for performance control, two NetScalers in HA and Azure to cope with external connections, so we're no longer reliant on the F5, and a scale-out file server in Azure to cope with the distributed load of profiles and Office 365 containers. So no longer were we looking at separate servers for the solutions, but a single resilient solution for both sets of containers. A new OU structure with streamlined GPOs, and my favorite was removing the IGL units from the domain and making them act as thin clients managed with UMS to be consistent. So new build implementation steps. We used the following optimizations in the base build. We removed all the active setup keys. My advice is to remove all of them. I've never had any issues, but you will know your environment's better than me. We use Citrix Optimizer to strip out services, scheduled tasks. There's lots of templates available for that, and it really is a good tool. Nothing wrong with the VMware version either. They pretty much do the same things. I like the Citrix Optimizer. Running auto logons will show you everything that runs on the startup of a machine. So strip out anything unnecessary from there to keep your logins very short. It's very important. And lastly, use BizF for sealing your image as a standard. So for the IT department, making that sealing process seamless and regimented helped a lot. Go on, Mark.
All right, so it's a question coming in from Louis, and Louis is asking, can you please ask what his thoughts are between FSLogix versus Citrix user app layers? Okay, yeah, good question. So Louis, funny enough, I'm giving a presentation tomorrow at a Citrix user meeting. That's a virtual one as well, so join that and you'll get all of my thoughts on that. But essentially, Citrix app layering is not as fully featured as FSLogix in the sense that
FSLogix is supporting the full Office 365 stack, and you also have the app masking capabilities inbuilt in that as well. So really, if you are not licensed for FSLogix in the myriad of licensing they have, then use the profile layers, but otherwise I would definitely stick with FSLogix.
Yeah, and there's also a comment coming in from Salim, who's saying FSLogix deployment is simple, Citrix UAL is complex. So yeah. Plenty of opinions in here.
If you haven't, have a look at the Citrix user profile layers. That's a new thing that they've just released, which is not the same as the app layers. So the app layers requires the app layering infrastructure, whereas the user profile layers don't. So yeah, check those out too.
All right, thanks.
Cheers, Mark. Okay, so we've set up this new environment now, which I've just gone through, and the management said, okay, that's great, but it's costing us a lot of money. I want you to prove it. So after doing all this work, we had a large reduction in support calls. I was very pleased. Management's in the cost though, and they wanted to see the proof that it was better. So I used Login PI and Login VSI to performance test and then proactively monitor response times. We compared this to some test runs on the older desktop server that we had remaining, and the difference was very significant. So we took reports of that and we supplied that to the management. We also set up a monitor with dashboards in the office. So we had a control up dashboard, a director dashboard, and EEC monitoring, as well as Login PI, by the way, that was also on there. So all of these things allowed future monitoring and performance analysis combined with help desk call levels that pretty much justified the cost to the business. So we didn't save money. Well, you can't really look at it like that, but it saved a lot of time and effort, which made people more productive, and gauging that is actually quite difficult, but essentially it was accepted that the solution was doing a good job. So problem number 4 was our internet connection, which I left right down the list, and purely I left it down here because really there was nothing for me to do. We reported the issue to the service provider, and the service provider did something that changed the situation and improved it for us. I think since then the service has been deprecated. It's no longer there. Webroot don't exist anymore for an internet proxy service. So I guess they didn't like it too much either. So I talked about IGL units and the varying configuration between these. Okay, specifically the Linux IGL units. When you log on to these things, so they auto log on with their generic account. Receiver pops up. You type in your credentials. You launch a session. Happy days. You log off your session, and then it logs you off the thin client, and then the auto log on kicks on again to log you back on with that generic account. So it's fresh for the next person. The Windows ones actually don't do that, and there is no hook with Windows. When you log off of your session, it will log you off of the Windows session as well. Now that might not seem important because it's a generic account, but obviously if you're logged into Storefront, your icons are on the desktop, and someone else could come along and launch your desktop. So when you're in healthcare or something similar, that could be a big problem. So what I did was I wrote a PowerShell script that will, when it logs on, it launches receiver and it waits for the WCF run 32, the executable that runs the desktop launcher window. It waits for that executable to run, and it just sits there watching continuously until you actually log off of your session or close that window. And when it picks that up, it logs the thin client off so that the auto login process will continue again. So that script's available on my blog site and is available, and you can use that pretty much on any Windows device to replicate thin client behavior, just with a standard Windows license. So with that, we got a consistent user experience between the two flavors of IGL units. So coming back to results, the big one is the 70% reduction in support tickets. We had support people asking us, is there anything that we can do for you today? Is there anything you want us to look at or test, which was great, right? Because we almost had like an inbuilt test bed before we gave anything to users. So we freed up quite a lot of time. So it was pretty impressive, and it was well received. Organisational improvements. So IT went from being disliked to liked, from being lazy and not doing anything to being people that, yep, we're proactive now. So the main issue was knowledge and confidence of the teams. Address this wherever you can. So if you're a consultant, train people, do a knowledge transfer. You're not you're not giving anything away. These people need help. And the users actually had a meeting with IT once a month to talk about their pain points and if anything had changed. So it really improved the situation. So talking to the users. Cloud costs. So everyone's happy, but it cost a lot. It was costing 24K a month before anything was put into to power manage those machines. So they were using Smart Scale, which unfortunately was deprecated, replaced with Auto Scale. However, Auto Scale is only available for Citrix Cloud customers. So during my work with them, I actually wrote a community-based script called PowerScale that can power manage these things for you. So it's just a PowerShell script that will create some nice HTML dashboards, but it will essentially scale machines up based on performance metrics, and it will power them down or out of hours so that you're saving some money. And there's quite a few people using that. We have a Slack channel on the world of EUC. So come and have a look. So what can you do today? And this is me wrapping up quite quickly because I've only got a minute, right, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah. So technically, optimize your images, use Citrix Optimizer, remove active setup keys, use auto runs to remove anything, and do this regularly, right? Always look at these things before you seal an image up to make sure nothing new has been added. Use BizF for sealing so that it's always clean, and optimize your GPOs if where possible. If you can, put them in a user environment manager or a workspace environment manager solution. But non-technical and the most important thing, talk to your users, understand their pain. Okay, cool. Thanks very much for your attention. Any questions, or I can take them in the chat afterwards?
Yeah, there's plenty of questions. So maybe you guys can copy paste them over to the general chat in the virtual expo and chat a bit further there, because we are moving over to the next session, which is actually going to be, oh, I should have checked this out before, on Windows Virtual Desktop by the Microsoft guys. So I'm sure it will be busy there. So if you go out of this session, there's a virtual expo you can click. There's a general chat in there. If you drop your questions, and there's actually quite a few, Leee will be there a few minutes to answer them. And also otherwise, I will make sure that these questions end up at Lee's so he can get back to you if needed. Leee, thanks so much. And let's talk again soon.
Thanks, man.